Hello and welcome to this Curious About Live session brought to you by Glasgow Science Centre. My name is Patrick and our guest for this session is Bryden Priest, who is a Community Projects Officer at SaxaVord Spaceport. Today, we're going to hear from Bryden about his journey into the space industry and a bit about what Scotland's role is in launching satellites into space. How cool is that? As you're watching this session, you might have your own questions, so please do write those in the chat box on YouTube, and Bryden and I will try and get through as many of these as we possibly can. Bryden, let's bring you in. How are you?
I'm good, thank you. Thank you for having me. How are you?
No, I'm good, thank you. Yeah, it's our pleasure to have you, and I'm sure everyone has loads of questions about space and satellites and what you do. So let's bring up the first one of those, which is, start at the start, Brian. What is a spaceport?
So I always describe a spaceport as an airport for rockets. So you can go to an airport anywhere in the world and you can fly with multiple different airlines. So we work the same way. So we don't work with one company who builds rockets. Probably important to note that we don't build rockets and we don't build satellites. There are other companies that do that and come to us to help them launch and get that into space. So we are going to be hopefully next year launching some of the first satellites from the UK into orbit. And I think we actually have a video of one of our clients doing some testing earlier in the summer, about June time, to prepare for what's hopefully going to happen next year.
Nice.
Engine 1 ignited, good RPM. Engine 2 ignited, good RPM. Engine 3 ignited, good RPM. Engine 4 ignited, a bit high on the RPM, but looks good.
Bryden, I feel like I was watching the start of a film there. That was amazing.
It was, and I was lucky enough to actually be there, standing a safe distance away, and watching that happen this summer, and it was incredible to finally see that and hear that sound that it makes, and see what it's actually going to look like. It's been a long time coming.
That does look amazing. Do you want to maybe talk us through a little bit about what we saw in that video? What was actually happening there?
Yeah, so all of these companies, so that was a company from Germany, Rocket Factory Augsburg, that have been working with us for a wee while now. They came over and this whole summer have been testing their rocket. So that was the first stage of a rocket, and they are up on the launch stool, that they were testing all of those engines. That there was 4 of the 9 engines that are on the rocket being tested just to make sure that they fire and they're all working properly. And unfortunately, that later in the summer, that didn't quite go to plan, but it's just the way space works, and hopefully they'll be back next year and even better.
Well, it certainly looked very impressive, and I'm sure everybody watching has got loads of questions already. But we'll move on to my next question for you, Bryden, which is, can you tell us more about your job? What is it you do?
So, as you said, Patrick, my job title is Community Projects Officer. That doesn't quite sum up a lot of the things I do. So, one of the main things I get to do is education. So, going around schools and being in Glasgow quite a lot and speaking to kids and making them realise that this is an industry that's really important to Scotland and something that they can realistically work in and be involved in. So, I never thought when I was at school that I'd be working in this job, and I bet some of you didn't quite realise that it's something that you can do in the future. I also get to do some slightly different things, not just education. So community engagement, so making sure that the community is happy with everything we're doing, or visitor management, so planning for launch day, whenever that comes, and what that's going to look like. How can people watch this? Will it be live streamed online? All those kind of questions that we're trying to figure out, because this is the first time this has happened in the UK. So we're all learning at the same time.
Brilliant. And speaking of schools and young people, we've got a question from a school in next, which is from West Coats Primary. Thank you very much. What age were you when you started your job, Bryden?
So I started working for the spaceport when I was, let me just think here, 20. I was 20 and I was still at university studying my degree. I studied primary school teaching, and we'll get into maybe that a bit later. But I was 20 and then I ended up teaching for a little bit. And then I've come back. So I've been in this job for 2 years now. I'm now 24. So I was 22 when I started this contract, but I've been working with the company since I was 20.
Brilliant. Well, why don't we talk about that a little bit then? So you started teaching and then you moved into the space industry. So, I mean, even the teachers
Yeah.
might be quite interested as well.
Yeah, so I grew up in Shetland. So the island that the spaceport's on is right up at the top of Shetland in the north of Scotland. And I grew up, went to school all the way through in Shetland, and then went to university to study to become a primary school teacher. So that's what I thought I wanted to do at that point. Then when I was in my final year of university in 2021, I got approached by somebody who worked for the spaceport asking if I would host the company podcast, which if you're interested is online on Spotify, anywhere you're looking for that. And I said yes, and I'm really glad I did say yes, because I wouldn't be sitting here now if I didn't say yes at that point. And that was just a little side job for me while I was still at uni. And then over that summer before I started teaching, that was my final year. And after you finish your degree to be a teacher, you do a probation year in a school. So you're still training, but you're working. Before I started that probation year, I got a 2-month contract just setting up some education type projects for the spaceport. And then once I'd done that probation year, I thought I really liked that job. That was very me. I still get to go into schools and work with kids and do the education side. But space is really exciting and all kids love space. So it's a really fun job. So that's kind of how I did it.
Sounds great. Let's crack on with another question for you, Bryden, which is, why are we launching satellites in Scotland?
So a lot of people don't realise, but Glasgow in Scotland, I'm seeing there's a lot of schools from Glasgow on here today. Glasgow in Scotland builds more satellites than anywhere else in the world other than California, and has done for quite a long time. So we can build satellites in Scotland, from small satellites to big satellites. We can also build rockets. There's a couple of companies in Scotland building rockets. But the one thing we can't do in Scotland is launch satellites. So that's where we come in, and we're trying to kind of complete that whole life cycle or ecosystem to get that satellite into orbit. So having a place to launch that rocket and that satellite from. A lot of the satellites that we'll be launching are going into low Earth orbit, and they're for monitoring the environment. So not looking out to space, but looking back down to Earth and kind of monitoring things like the heat in different places or where certain emissions might be coming from. So that's the main reason for it. But it's really important because it makes everything we do on this planet more efficient and helps us kind of plan better for how we're going to do better for the environment.
Sounds great. And we've got an image up on the screen just now. I wonder if you could tell us where that is or what we're looking at.
Yes. So this is one of the launch pads on our launch site. So right at the front there is the integration hangar. That's where the rocket will go and the satellites will be put inside the rocket eventually. It looks really small there. And I always say that picture looks like it's a Lego model or something, but that's real. And in the far distance is the launch stool that you saw in that video just at the start. So at that point, the first stage of the rocket wasn't on there. So this is one of the launch pads. On our launch site, it kind of extends out past that. And there's going to be 3 separate launch pads because we'll hopefully have multiple rocket companies working on the site at the same time and preparing for their launch, whenever that may be.
That's so cool. If you're watching this and you have loads of questions for Bryden, please do typing those into YouTube just now, and we'll try and get through as many as we can. We've not got them for long, so use this opportunity while you've got it. Another question coming up for you just now is, why is the spaceport in Shetland specifically?
That's a great question. So the main reason the spaceport is in Shetland is safety. So a few years ago in 2017, when I was still at school even, the government published a report that identified this exact location in Unst in Shetland as the best place to launch rockets. And the reason for that is the rockets we are going to be launching are trying to go into polar or sun synchronous orbits, which is going from pole to pole. And so we're trying to launch north, essentially, or pretty much north. And so above Shetland, all that's there is open water. So it means not overflying any populated areas. So we need to really think about the people and where the people are. And the island we're based on in Unst only has 600 people living on it, and not many of them are that close to the spaceport. So we have to think about how far people are going to be away from the rocket before it launches, and also once the rocket is launched, is it going to be going over the top of any other countries or things like that? So it's essentially that. And also parts of the rocket, so that first stage you see in those videos doesn't go all the way into space. That part will fall back down into the ocean. So having that massive ocean above Shetland is quite handy and makes it a lot more efficient, as we have to use a lot less fuel to get into orbit because we're not having to make the rocket turn or anything like that as it's heading up.
That's really, really interesting. You mentioned there, and forgive me if you've talked about this already, you mentioned orbit and different kinds of orbit. I wonder if you could just do a quick explainer for us about what you mean by orbit. What is orbit?
Essentially, and I'm not from a technical background, so this might be slightly wrong, but essentially we are launching into polar and sun synchronous orbits, as I said. So a lot of people think that satellites go around the equator of the Earth, and a lot of them do. Our rockets are going to be going, satellites will be going from pole to pole, and that essentially means that when the Earth is turning inside that orbit, that satellite can see any given space on the Earth, whereas these satellites that are going around the equator are only seeing a specific band or wherever they are on the Earth. They're only ever seeing that single circle that they do, whereas ours will see everyone because they're spinning, so is the Earth inside that. That's a little bit complicated, but hope you made sense of that.
I've got it. I made sense of it. Thank you. We've got a question coming up for you now, Bryden, from Battlefield Primary. Thank you very much, Battlefield. Why do we not hear as much about Scotland's space activities as we do from countries like the USA, etc.?
Yeah, I think it's probably quite a complicated one, and there's a lot of different answers to this. I think because the US is always kind of talking about manned spaceflight and astronauts and that kind of side of the sector, that's why, and I mean, that is pretty exciting, sending people into space. That's not really happening in the UK. So that's probably, I would say, the main reason that we don't hear as much about it. But hopefully, if everything goes to plan next year, you'll be hearing a lot more about Scotland's space sector. And hopefully that'll help promote other parts of the industry, not just spaceports, but people who are programming satellites or building satellites, and so that you're more aware of that, because a lot of that is happening in Glasgow.
Yeah, I mean, I have to admit, until I started at the Science Centre, I didn't really know that stuff was going on within Scotland and space, and it kind of blew my mind hearing about all these different companies we've got. And the space industry is massive in Scotland. So if you are watching this and wanting a career in space, then it really is something worth thinking about. We've got a question coming up from a school now for you, Bryden, from West Coast Primary again. We Googled you and saw that you can play the fiddle. Man of many talents, Bryden. Do you still play the fiddle?
I do still play the fiddle. So I started playing the fiddle when I was 8 years old, amongst a few different instruments. I play the piano, sing, play the accordion as well. In Shetland, you'll struggle to find many people who haven't played the fiddle at some point in their life. But yes, no, I still play it. I still use it in my job, funnily enough. It's quite handy to have something like that up your sleeve if there's ever a staff gathering of any kind. Then I'll usually get asked to play something. So yeah, no, it's a big part of my life, and I spend a lot of my spare time doing that, and even some of my work time. So instruments are important in any job, I would say.
Well done, West Coast Primary, for doing your research and Googling Bryden before the session. What do you mean when you say you use your fiddle within work? What do you do as music?
Essentially, we are a company who have quite we recognize the importance of culture, I suppose, because we're in a place like Shetland. There's so much culture that's really important to the people that live here, including myself, who grew up here. So there's me and George Spence, also from Unst, playing the fiddle on a beach, actually. But through my job, that's also still quite important. So we have a live podcast, in addition to the company podcast where we talk about space. We have a live podcast on Facebook and YouTube every Sunday, where we get different people on to play. So I'm on that quite regularly. I would like to be on it more often, but yeah, so it's part of my job, really, getting to do that and entertain people when we have guests or visiting politicians or things like that. It's a useful thing to be able to do.
And maybe one day, Bryden, you'll be the first person ever to play fiddle in space. Who knows?
You never know.
We've got a live question coming up next, which is from Battlefield Primary once again. Thank you. great question. What has been your biggest or proudest achievement in your job so far?
So I started this contract in 2022, and we have an education strategy. So a big part of my job, as I said, is education. And in 2023, we managed through various different projects to interact with over 250,000 kids across the UK. And that's through the help of different organisations like the Glasgow Science Centre. We're working with them, or different. We work with Glow as well in schools to have sessions on there sometimes that are live. And that was a big proud achievement of mine. That year, one of our main engagements was through a festival in Shetland called the Tall Ships Festival. And as part of that, I had the opportunity to meet Princess Anne, the Princess Royal, when she was up, and talk to her a bit about what we do. There's me last July doing that. So that was a big honour to be able to talk about the work that we're doing, and kind of talk about how important I think it is, because it is a really important thing to be talking about space and the jobs that are going to be coming up in the next few years.
And why is that so important, Bryden?
I think it's because people don't realize that this is something they can do. And I think even myself, I felt like I was one of the first kind of generations of kids to be going through primary school and secondary school and being told the job you'll end up doing probably doesn't exist yet. And this is a perfect example of that. This wasn't even a job when I went to university. The company didn't exist then. And this wasn't even really a priority for Shetland or the UK. But all of these companies are looking for people to fill these different jobs. And I always speak about the spaceport. I think there's probably only 4 or 5 different people in the spaceport who have studied a degree specifically to do the job that they do now. You look at myself, I was a primary school teacher, and now I'm working in space education. We have lawyers who studied law and are now space lawyers because they're learning all these new skills and having to work with space law that you'd never really think about. So it doesn't even matter if you're going into a STEM career, you might end up linking into the space industry in some way, whether you're a graphic designer or whatever you want to be.
I love that, what you've just said, because it's so true, and that the job you might have when you're older might not exist yet. And that's kind of mind-blowing to think of. We've got another live question for you coming up next from Battlefield Primary once again. What advice would you give anyone who wants to work in the space industry?
I would say yes to any opportunities. So like I said about the podcast I got asked to do first, I wasn't full-time with the spaceport, but I'm glad I said yes to that opportunity. And these kind of opportunities come along, and it might not seem obvious what the benefit of them is. So really think about what you're being offered and what might come from that in the future. I would also say to research a lot, look at these different companies. If there's a sector you're looking into, think about the jobs, think about the skills you might need for that job. There's a lot of them you might already have, and some of them you might have to work at a little bit, but all of these things are useful. I would also say reach out to these companies, send them a letter, write them a letter, because the worst they can do is not reply, but most of them will. I know we will reply to you and tell you what we can do to help you. And we have university students that come to us on placements every year. And unfortunately, at the moment, we can't do that for anybody under 18, but it's a really good opportunity. And most companies will do their best to help you, because especially in the space sector, people are really keen to engage with young people and people that are interested in what we're doing.
I think you've just signed yourself up for receiving hundreds or thousands of letters, Bryden. We've got you for a little bit longer, so please do keep sending in your live questions on YouTube. We'd love to get through as many of those as we can. In the meantime, Bryden, what's something people would be surprised to know about your job?
Oh, that's a hard question. I would say the variety of what I do. So no day is the same. It's not a boring job at all. I spend a lot of times at my desk, but I get to meet lots of exciting people, even through the Glasgow Science Centre, getting to meet astronauts and people like that are coming through every now and again. I think, yeah, it's really not a boring job at all working in education. I love getting to go into schools and speak to kids as much as possible. So yeah, just how exciting it is all the time. There's never a dull day.
You've surprised us already, finding out about your fiddle playing and your accordion playing and keeping it fresh for sure. We've got another question for you coming up now, which is, well, you mentioned that you touched on this a couple of questions ago, Bryden, but maybe we can go into a bit more detail. What skills do you think are important for your job? So what do you have to be good at specifically?
I think I find the skills that I find the most useful are communication, being able to talk to somebody and get them to understand what you're saying, or maybe going through a few different ways of explaining something for somebody to understand. I find that a lot with some of the engineers we work with. Trying to explain something to me when I'm not from a technical background can be challenging sometimes for them. Communication and teamwork. I'm lucky that I get to engage with almost everybody within our company in some way or another. So getting to work with them and find the best way to work with them. Um, Let me think. Organization. So a lot of the company work remote sometimes. So making sure that you're able to stay organized and manage your own time and be effective in what you're doing is quite important. So time management, really important when you're kind of leading your path through whatever project you're working on.
That's great. We have another live question for you coming up next, Bryden, which is from Battlefield Primary. What has been the most interesting or exciting mission from SaxaVord Spaceport? So what's the coolest project you've been involved in?
Coolest project I've been involved in. So in terms of missions, we've not actually launched yet. Hopefully that will be happening next year, and you'll most likely see a lot about that in the press because it's quite a big thing for the UK. I love some of the projects we've worked on the education front. We have a project called Starflight Academy, which you'll be able to access on Glow through RM that run the Glow platform. There's lots of resources about the spaceport, about SaxaVord and why we're there. There's some activities for any teachers out there that are interested that you can do to learn more about SaxaVord and the types of rockets we'll be launching, or our clients will be launching, the type of satellites that'll be on them that are going to help the environment. So that's probably my favorite project I've been involved in.
Fantastic. We have I think an image coming up just now, which I'd like to ask you about, which is this one. We saw this, and I wondered if you could explain what is going on here, Bryden.
Yes, so I have quite a historical connection to the area we now use as our launch site. So my great grandfather lived on that site up until World War II. And then in the background there, you can see a building. So the site was used in World War II for the military. So the Air Force was based there with a radar to kind of help defend the UK during that time. We thought that was kind of the main piece of history there. There's also Viking longhouses dotted about around there from a lot longer ago than the war. And then last summer, every time we dig up a piece of land, we have to do what's called strip and records. We dig up a little bit of soil and check that there's nothing there so that we can be careful that we don't disturb anything that might have some historical significance. And we do have to be careful anyway because of those buildings that are left over from World War II. But last summer, I got a phone call to tell me that this had been found. And this is actually a Bronze Age burial site. So a lot older and possibly one of the oldest things that's ever been found in Shetland. It looks like a rumble of stones, but the archaeologists assure us that this is actually a really significant find. Thankfully, it didn't affect really the build of the spaceport, just meant that we had to move some tracking and telemetry equipment that was planned to go on that site. But quite an exciting thing to find. And yeah, not what we were expecting to happen last year, but really exciting.
I mean, it's kind of amazing to me that while you're building something that's literally represents the future, that a spaceport, digging down
And I think
a few feet, you find something that's thousands of years old.
yeah, and it's all connected. All these, even the reasons that the military were there are quite similar to the reasons that were there. And that probably they seem to think that there's connections between this Bronze Age site being there and they were all connected to the stars and things like that as well. So it is kind of odd. And the Viking history as well. We have a bit of a slogan within the company about from longship to spaceship in the future. So it's going a little bit further back than that now, which is cool.
That's great. Yeah, full circle almost. I've got another question for you coming up, Bryden, which is, what is the most challenging part of your job? Thank you, Battlefield.
Ooh, I would say probably the organization side of it, because there's a lot of things going on and we're spread all over the place. So I spend some of my time up in Shetland, where I'm from and where I am right now, at the spaceport or in schools in Shetland speaking to kids about what we're doing. I spend sometimes on the Scottish mainland as well, but I also travel down to England as well for some events. But But yeah, trying to kind of stay connected with everybody that's kind of spread out, because we do need to have people everywhere, because it just makes things a lot easier. Can be a bit challenging sometimes, but I enjoy it. It's good to build those relationships.
So how many people work for SaxaVord Spaceport?
I think at the moment we're about 80 people, but we quite often have a lot more than that on site. So RFA, that video we showed at the start, that's the German company, one of the companies we're working with. They will also have people here on site quite a lot of the time when they're doing activities like that. So there was probably an additional 40 odd people on site during that kind of period over the summer when they were pushing through that. So yeah, it fluctuates, but 80 staff members for SaxaVord Spaceport.
Fab. We've got another question for you now, Bryden, which is from Battlefield once more. Could you tell us more about the range of different jobs people do? So we were kind of just about to speak about that, weren't we?
Yeah, so there's lots of different jobs, and a lot of them you wouldn't expect. So there's the kind of obvious ones, the people who need to know about rockets and the range. So when we're talking about range, we're talking about the area that the rocket will fly into above Shetland, so making sure that it's safe. So managing the areas of water that's around UNST, and the areas of air, so making sure that there's no planes flying over and things like that. So that's our range team. So there's quite a few people that work with them. Operations is the side where they're talking about the launch site and everything that will happen there and making sure that's safe. So whether it's managing the gases that are there and having the knowledge there. But we also need people to look after these people when they're on. So we have accommodations, people that we need chefs to cook for these people. We need people to clean and change the beds and all that side of things. And I mentioned earlier about space lawyers. So we have 2 members of staff who are working in space law, solicitors, that are working with our clients and with other people to make sure that everything we're doing is by the book. So yeah, there's lots of different types of jobs, accountants and finance and graphic designers that are doing all of our marketing kind of stuff. So yeah, there's a wide range of things that people can do.
Yeah, it's a big team effort, isn't it? And it's crazy to think that, you know, space law is something that is going to be important, because as humans get closer to space and as we send more and more satellites into space, it's something we really need to consider. Bryden, we've only got time for one more question, I'm afraid. And that is, are there plans to send people into space from SaxaVord Spaceport?
So the quick answer is not at the moment. So no, but I would put after that when I was still at school, there was no plans for a spaceport in UNST, and not one in Scotland really. So who knows? I mean, this is not that long since 2017, and who knows what might happen in 10, 15, 20 years. So you never know.
You never know. Like you said earlier, the job you end up doing might not exist yet. So if you are watching this and you're at school, maybe you will be one of the first people to go into space from SaxaVord. Who knows? Bryden, thank you so much for joining us. It's been a real pleasure to talk to you today.
Thank you.
And thank you to you, our audience, for your brilliant questions. If you'd like to find out more about space, satellites, or engineering, you can find this on the Curious About website, which is curiousabout.glasgowsciencecentre.org. You can also find lots more videos, activities, or games. And if you missed the start of this session or you want to watch it again, you can find it and replay it in the live sessions section of that website. Please take some time to leave a quick review. There's a survey popping up in the chat box just now. But until next time, thank you very much and goodbye.